Welcome to the training session for workplace violence and harassment prevention. We have a number of items we will be covering in this training session. Recognizing harassment, bullying, and workplace violence, understanding our harassment and workplace violence prevention plans, understanding your role and responsibilities, also our workplace violence emergency response plans and our domestic violence protocols. The session has been divided to deal with harassment first, workplace violence, and then domestic violence. But before we start diving into these two sensitive topics, we need to discuss some background information. Laws change to reflect society's morals, and OHS legislation is no exception. Harassment and bullying have been added to OHS in 2018. Social expectations about what constitutes workplace health and safety have changed over time. Under Alberta OHS legislation, harassment and bullying at a worksite is considered a hazard, as well as violence. The employer is responsible to implement hazard controls to mitigate the risk of the hazard. It further states employer must, as far as reasonably practical, ensure their workers are not subject to harassment and bullying at a worksite. Workers also have a duty to refrain from causing harassment, bullying, and workplace violence under Alberta OHS legislation. Our harassment prevention plan and workplace prevention plan have two parts. One is a policy, and then there are procedures. The harassment prevention plan and the violence prevention plan can be found in site docs in the resource section. You click on Health and Safety Manual. You will find them there as you scroll down. Click on them. You will see a view or sign option. When you click on that, then the document will come up in which you can read. Once finished, you can just press the X and you will be out of the document. With respect to the difference between harassment and violence, there is no clear division. The line between them both is very gray and blurry. Let's turn to responsibilities. Let's begin to examine the process by looking at job position responsibilities. The first job position is the position of management. Management is responsible to ensure workers are aware of both prevention plans, adhere to the outlined procedures and policy, do not dismiss or downplay violent or harassment incidents, and notify parties of incident results. Management also is responsible to take immediate and appropriate action to report or deal with incidents of harassment, bullying, or violence, whether brought to their attention or personally observed, assist in incident investigations, and under no circumstances should a legitimate complaint be dismissed or downplayed, nor should the complainant be told to deal with it personally. Workers also have responsibilities. It is the responsibilities of workers to not participate in harassment or bullying, will conduct themselves in a manner that meets acceptable social standards and contribute to a positive work environment. They will familiarize themselves with the procedures that are in place to protect them. All workers are responsible for reporting any incidents as set out in these prevention plans and attend training sessions when required. Complainant, respondent, and witnesses will participate in the investigation process. And finally, investigators are to be fair and unbiased in their investigation. So what is harassment and bullying? Let's watch a short video.
It seems like everyone is talking about bullying and harassment. But what does it mean for you and your workplace? This video explains what workplace bullying and harassment is and what it's not. Legal obligations for employers, supervisors, and workers. And where to get the information you need. So first off, what is workplace bullying and harassment? It includes any inappropriate conduct or comment by a person towards a worker that the person knew or reasonably ought to have known would cause that worker to be humiliated or intimidated. Examples could be yelling or name-calling, vandalizing personal belongings, harmful hazing or initiation practices. There might be a single perpetrator or a group. There may be just one target or many. Bullying and harassment can occur between coworkers or between the employer and a worker. Or it can come from external sources, such as members of the public, clients and customers, or workers from other organizations. Bullying and harassment also extends to online activities. Cyberbullying can occur through email, text messages, social networks, and other websites. What is not considered workplace bullying and harassment? Managers and supervisors have many responsibilities. Decisions relating to job duties, workloads, deadlines, and performance management, or the direction of workers.
Gabriel Industry recognizes that harassment may be internally, that is worker to worker, or come from an external source. A big component of alleged harassment cases is the intent versus perception. What one person perceives as harassment, another person may not. Cultural differences can come into play with harassment. For example, in the UK, it is socially acceptable to call people, including your coworker, love or honey. In Canada, it is not. What about Spain? Instead of shaking hands, a little kiss is given on both sides of the cheek. Classifying something as workplace harassment or violence is an individual assessment based on reasonable perceptions. Harassing behaviors include behaviors that are offensive, intimidating, isolating, embarrassing, demeaning, bullying, humiliation, and does include sexual harassment. Examples are jokes, displaying or circulating offensive materials, repeated offensive or intimidating phone calls, or workplace sexual harassment. Bullying does mean different things to different people. On your screen are some examples like spreading rumors, blaming, isolating, or making unreasonable demands or changing deadlines. It also includes discounting achievements, stealing credit, withholding information to set the person up for failure, taking away work responsibilities for no reason, spying on the person. There are items, though, however, that are not workplace harassment. That is when an employer or supervisor, while managing or directing an employee, makes reasonable actions and changes, such as changing work assignments, inspecting workplaces, or implementing health and safety measures. Taking reasonable and fair disciplinary action is not deemed as workplace harassment, nor is having a difference of opinion or minor disagreements between coworkers. Still, two more items that are not deemed as workplace harassment are difficult conditions of employment and work-related stress. On its own does not constitute harassment. Now that we have defined what harassment is, let's watch a short video on how to report harassment.
Here's an example of how you might talk to someone who is bullying and harassing you at work.
Hi, Cindy. Could we talk when you've got a minute?
Sure, I'm free now.
On Monday, you said my report was fine. Then today, at our team meeting, you said I must have been drunk when I wrote it. You've said things like that before.
When I looked at it again today, I thought your report was garbage, so I said so.
Cindy, when you insult me in front of our team, it's humiliating. I'd prefer if you would talk to me privately. If you provide suggestions instead of criticizing me, I could fix it.
I don't understand why you're bringing this up. No one else has a problem with how I speak.
Maybe it's not your intention, but it's degrading and it needs to stop.
All workers have a duty not to engage in bullying and harassment. If you witness or experience it, you must report it.
If you are having difficulty in asking the harassment to stop, you have the right to seek assistance in communicating your objection. You can seek it internally or externally through the police or other legal entity. To support the allegation of harassment, it is best that you document it. Make sure it is written, dates, location, what was said or done, and any witnesses' names that were there. Reporting an incident has a two-step procedure. First, inform Murray or designate. The second step is to document the incident on the incident report in Site Docs. In the formal reporting procedure, Written complaints of harassment or bullying should be submitted within 12 months of the last incident or event of alleged harassment. You always have the ability to exercise your right to contact Alberta OHS and make a complaint. Alberta OHS does not conduct an investigation but will follow up to ensure an investigation is completed. You also have the right to make a formal harassment claim. If your harassment incident involves discrimination, as defined under Alberta human rights legislation, you may file the complaint with the Alberta Human Rights Commission. And finally, you have the right to proceed through civil litigation. Once the incident has been reported, there are two ways in which the harassment incident may be addressed. One is informal approach through the use of a facilitated discussion, mediation, or group discussion. The other is a formal approach through conciliation, where no investigation is necessary, or through an investigation. In some circumstances, the incident may result in filing of a WCB claim. WCB can provide compensation coverage when the bullying or harassment has led the complainant to develop a diagnosable injury or illness. Some related diagnoses include depression, anxiety, adjustment disorder, or post-traumatic stress disorder. Arrangements may be made at the time during the handling of a complaint and where appropriate in the circumstances so the complainant and respondent are separated or that communications between the two cease or are reduced in order to stabilize the situation in the interim pending the outcome of the complaint. Due to the fact an incident can involve not only internal parties but as well as external parties, Gabriel Industries may opt to hire a third party to investigate or conduct the investigation internally. Confidentiality will be maintained at all times. Let's watch a short video on addressing complaints.
Employers must have procedures in place to deal with workplace bullying and harassment. If an incident or complaint occurs, an investigation must be conducted promptly. Here's an example of how to talk to an employee who's been investigated for bullying and harassment.
Chef, as you know, we received a complaint from Janet about your behavior in the kitchen.
Well, she's got to toughen up. We work in a restaurant. It's a high-pressure place.
I get it. The kitchen can be a stressful place to work, but we don't tolerate abusive behavior. We investigated the complaint and determined that your intimidating behavior and verbal abuse were bullying and harassment. Janet has asked for an apology.
Really? You want me to apologize to one of the cooks?
Yes, and it's important you understand that your negative behavior affects everyone, not just Janet. A copy of the investigation has been put in your personnel file. Now let's sit down and review the company policy on bullying and harassment, and make sure this doesn't happen again.
If an incident or complaint occurs, investigations should be fair and impartial, be focused on finding facts and evidence. For more information on how to conduct investigations, go to worksafebc.com/bullying.
Other remedial action may not be so straightforward. The remedial action resulting from an investigation will vary depending upon the circumstances of the harassment incident. Internal complaints, the respondent will be told the results within 3 days in writing. External parties will be notified as soon as reasonably practicable. There are 3 ways in which you can challenge the investigation results. One is by applying for judicial review. The second, by filing a complaint with Alberta Human Rights Commission. Or the third, by filing a complaint with Alberta Occupational Health and Safety. Now let's turn to workplace violence. Let's watch a short video on violence in the workplace. OHS defines violence, whether at a worksite or work-related, as the threatened, attempted, or actual conduct of a person that causes or is likely to cause physical or psychological injury or harm and includes domestic or sexual violence. Let's move away from OHS legislation and shift our attention to the four main categories of workplace violence. The first is stranger violence. This is someone who is not known to you, such as an active shooter who comes onto a work site. The second is worker-to-worker violence. That includes current and former co-workers. The third is client-to-customer violence. An example of this is a co-worker from another organization and our organization. The last category is domestic violence. As domestic violence is a large category in itself, we will have a training session at the end of the workplace violence to address domestic violence. Violence in the workplace could put a worker at risk of either physical or psychological harm or both. On the screen are a number of examples. Physical and psychological harm can come in the forms of physical attack or aggression or threatening behavior. You will see some examples in front of you. Verbal or written threats can come in the form of notes, emails, or texts. All of these include sexual violence. Sexual violence as a workplace hazard refers to any sexual act, attempt to attain a sexual act, or other act directed against a worker's sexuality using coercion by any person regardless of their relationship to the victim in a workplace or work-related setting. Sexual violence exists on a continuum from obscene name-calling to rape and/or homicide and includes online forms of sexual violence such as internet threats and harassment and sexual exploitation. Let's move from responsibilities and discuss procedures. There are a number of procedures we will talk about: obtaining assistance, reporting incidents, documenting incidents, interim measures, incident investigations, management of the offender, communication of the results, and worker support. The first procedure is obtaining assistance. Obtaining assistance means the action of communicating your need for someone to come to where you are. You need help. There are a number of different ways you can obtain assistance: by calling 911 or requesting assistance from a coworker or a designate either face-to-face or by phone. Reporting an incident is a two-step procedure. First, inform Murray or designate immediately. The second step is to document the incident on the incident report in Site Docs. Incident reporting to external parties vary depending on the incident. If the incident involves the police or has the potential to involve the police, the steps are as follows. Still notify Murray immediately. Worker seek medical attention if required. Worker will file a police report about the incident. An incident report form is completed in Site Docs. In some circumstances, the incident may result in the filing of a WCB claim. Moving from reporting the incident, let's look at interim measures. Interim measures means reasonably available to protect the parties while the investigation is pending. Examples of interim measures are alternative work schedules, interim suspensions, contact restrictions. It is responsibility of Murray to implement the interim measures. Due to the fact an incident can involve not only internal parties but as well as external parties, confidentiality will be maintained at all times. If the incident is investigated and action is taken by the police, documentation is required and obtained by the worker. The purpose of the investigation is to determine the causes and implement corrective action to prevent reoccurrence. Murray and James must take into consideration the following factors when determining corrective actions: impact of the abuse, nature of the violence, the degree of aggressiveness, period of time, frequency of the abuse, and vulnerability of the victim. Murray or designate is responsible to communicate the results within 3 days in writing of the allegations and corrective action to Gabriel Industry affected workers. External parties will be notified as soon as reasonably practicable. Following an incident, any or all of the following may be provided to the worker: physical support, environmental support, psychological support, social support, WCB assistance, and or information about rights. Before we conclude this training for violence prevention, we need to go over the emergency response plan for violent incidents that Gabriel Industries has determined may require rescue or evacuation. These plans include hostage, robbery, bomb threats, and active shooter. If you are taken hostage, follow these guidelines. Call 911 if possible. Do not turn on a fire alarm if you are in a facility. Obey the captor's instructions. Obey police officers' directions, and leave the area when safe to do so. The bottom line is, do not be a hero. Now let's turn our attention by watching a short video on bomb threats. Now let's turn to robberies. For an armed robbery, obey the robber's instructions. For theft and vandalism, notify Murray. Murray will decide on the filing of a police report. Now let's watch a short video on what to do in the event of an active shooter.
It may feel like just another day at the office, but occasionally, life feels more like an action movie than reality. The authorities are working hard to protect you and to protect our public spaces. But sometimes bad people do bad things. Their motivations are different. The warning signs may vary, but the devastating effects are the same. And unfortunately, you need to be prepared for the worst. If you were ever to find yourself in the middle of an active shooter event, your survival may depend on whether or not you have a plan. The plan doesn't have to be complicated. There are 3 things you could do that make a difference: run, hide, fight. First and foremost, if you can get out, do. Always try and escape or evacuate, even when others insist on staying. Encourage others to leave with you, but don't let them slow you down with indecision. Remember what's important: you, not your stuff. Leave your belongings behind and try to find a way to get out safely. Trying to get yourself out of harm's way needs to be your #1 priority. Once you are out of the line of fire, try to prevent others from walking into the danger zone and call 911. If you can't get out safely, you need to find a place to hide. Act quickly and quietly. Try to secure your hiding place the best you can. Turn out lights, and if possible, remember to lock doors. Silence your ringer and vibration mode on your cell phone. And if you can't find a safe room or closet, try to conceal yourself behind large objects that may protect you. Do your best to remain quiet and calm. As a last resort, if your life is at risk, whether you are alone or working together as a group, fight. Act with aggression. Improvise weapons. Disarm him. And commit to taking the shooter down, no matter what. Try to be aware of your environment. Always have an exit plan. Know that in an incident like this, victims are generally chosen randomly. The event is unpredictable and may evolve quickly.
ice and get my back.
The first responders on the scene are not there to evacuate or tend to the injured. They are well trained and are there to stop the shooter. Your actions can make a difference for your safety and survival. Be aware and be prepared. And if you find yourself facing an active shooter, there are 3 key things you need to remember to survive. Run, hide, fight.
Before we can conclude this training session, we need to address domestic violence. 74% of domestic violence incidents do spill on to Alberta work sites, and Gabriel Industries will do whatever is reasonably practical to assist our workers in dealing with domestic violence. In this portion of the training session, we will be discussing the following topics: recognizing domestic violence, how domestic violence impacts work sites, what to say if someone tells you they are being abused, domestic violence leave of absence procedure, and assistance options. Let's watch a short video on defining domestic violence.
There are many common misunderstandings about what constitutes domestic violence. Having a better understanding of what domestic violence is can help you identify if you're experiencing it, or if someone you know is experiencing it. So let's begin today's conversation with a definition. Domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control over another partner. This occurs through a systematic pattern of intimidation, manipulation, humiliation, isolation, fear, terror, coercion, threats, blaming, or injury to the victim. That's a mouthful for sure. Sometimes domestic violence is also referred to as domestic abuse, relationship abuse, or intimate partner violence. Regardless of the term, they all mean abuse that occurs between married couples, cohabitating partners, dating partners, or relatives, and can involve children or siblings. Domestic violence happens to people in all walks of life, regardless of age, gender, sexual orientation, race, religion, education, profession, or socioeconomic status. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men experience some form of domestic violence during their lifetime, either directly as a victim of abuse or by witnessing it as children. If you're currently experiencing it, it's important to realize many other people have gone and are going through the same adversity, and that help is available. We'll talk more about help options later in this video. The most common age that domestic violence first occurs for both women and men is between 18 to 24 years old, although it can be experienced at any age and can be ongoing, even affecting seniors. A frequent misconception is that domestic violence always involves physical bodily harm. Often it does involve physical violence, but it frequently also involves emotional abuse, sexual abuse, economic abuse, and spiritual abuse. Some of these forms of abuse, which involve name-calling, threats, possessiveness, distrust, or countless other tactics, can be more difficult to detect because they don't leave marks, bruises, or broken bones, and because they may be dismissed or downplayed by both the victim and the abuser, as well as those around them, when in fact they are forms of domestic violence. Let's now examine 5 forms of domestic violence. Physical abuse can look like slapping, shoving, grabbing, pinching, biting, hair pulling, hitting, strangulation, beating, or at its most grave, assault with a deadly weapon. Not often talked about in the context of physical abuse is denying a partner medical care or forcing alcohol or drug use upon them. Most people can recognize physical abuse. Emotional abuse doesn't leave visible marks. However, it's just as harmful because it undermines an individual's self-worth or self-esteem, in addition to isolating them from friends, family, and their support system who can help. Sometimes you'll hear emotional abuse called coercive control or psychological abuse. In any event, it's akin to brainwashing through constant verbal criticism, belittling, shaming, guilt trips, name-calling, threats, sarcasm, interrogation, jealousy, trivialization, diminishing one's abilities, nonverbal coercion, harming pets, destroying valuables and property, isolation, or damaging a victim's relationship with his or her children. Sexual abuse is the next form. This involves forcing or pressuring a partner to do something sexually, which can range from unwanted kissing or touching to rape. This may also involve threatening someone in order to manipulate them into performing a sexual act, or pressuring them to allow explicit photos or videos of themselves to be taken that the abuser later uses as leverage to control the survivor. Sexual abuse is also restricting a survivor's access to birth control and condoms, forcing her to become pregnant or have an abortion, or repeatedly using sexual insults to demean a victim. Economic abuse is making or attempting to make an individual financially dependent on their abuser by maintaining total control over financial resources. It can involve forbidding one to work, forcing one to work without pay, controlling how money is spent, putting a partner on an allowance, misuse of someone's personal information to open credit cards, loans, or bank accounts, ruining one's credit, or withholding basic necessities like food, clothing, medication, and housing. Finally, there is spiritual abuse, also known as religious abuse. This includes forbidding a partner from practicing their moral or religious beliefs, or misusing religious scripture to instill fear, guilt, or subservience. This form of abuse may also include manipulating an individual to behave in a certain way, or making them believe abuse is part of a normal relationship and that divorce is not an option. An abuser may also justify abuse through religious scripture or convince the survivor that rewards exist in the afterlife for enduring abuse. If you speak with people who have endured abuse, more often than not, they will tell you their relationship started off well, or their abuser was perfectly charming at the outset of the relationship. Acts that start out as seemingly harmless or even gratifying, like wanting the victim to spend all their time only with them because they love them so much, can morph into abuse. The frequency and intensity of abuse varies. Abusers may apologize profusely for their actions or try to convince a victim they do these things out of love or care, or that they just lost control temporarily. However, power and control almost always intensifies over time, despite any apologies, and often escalates into physical abuse that can become increasingly more violent. It can be difficult to understand why someone abuses someone else. Is it mental illness, anger management issues, life pressures, childhood exposure to domestic violence, or alcohol or drug use that causes someone to abuse? It is not. Instead, abuse is caused by one person's belief that they have the right to control their partner. And try as one may, the odds of an abuser changing or curtailing their behavior are extremely low. Domestic violence not only affects those who are abused, but also family, friends, coworkers, witnesses, and the community. Children that grow up witnessing domestic violence are among those most impacted. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, or ACEs, is one of the largest investigations on this topic and has determined that frequent exposure to violence predisposes children to numerous social and physical problems. It teaches children violence is a normal way of life, therefore increasing their risk of becoming society's next generation of victims and abusers. These realities are why it is so important to understand what domestic violence is and what it looks like. It may help someone avoid an abusive partner altogether or identify the signs early enough to terminate a relationship before separation becomes complex. For those struggling with an abuser, the good news is there are a tremendous number of resources available to help you. In fact, there are close to 3,000 domestic violence shelters throughout the US and Canada, covering nearly every imaginable region. You can find the one nearest you at domesticshelters.org.
There are two signs of domestic violence, direct and indirect. Some examples of direct signs are injuries like bruises and black eyes, unexplained accidents, or wearing inappropriate clothing for weather, like turtlenecks in the summer. Other direct signs are increased phone calls or reluctance to talk to someone. Some indirect examples are being absent or late for work, exhibiting signs of anxiety, change in job performance, or making special requests. Still more indirect signs are withdrawment, irrational fears, and everything is well philosophy. Domestic violence affects organizations. Examples include reduced worker productivity, increased absenteeism, replacement, recruitment, and training costs, and higher company health expenses. Still, more examples of domestic violence are decreased employee morale, strained relationships, potential harm to employees or coworkers, and liability costs. Now let's watch a short video on what to say if you find that someone is experiencing domestic violence and has informed you as such.
Alex, I'm worried about you. You're a great worker, but lately you seem distracted.
Is it okay to talk about my personal problems at work?
If you tell me what's wrong, maybe I can help.
I didn't want to bring it up at work, but my partner is hurting me at home.
That's so hard to believe.
Does my boss think I'm lying?
How do you put up with this?
Does he think it's my fault?
You should leave your partner.
If only it were that easy.
Alex, I'm worried about you. You know, you're a great worker, but lately you seem distracted. If you tell me what's wrong, maybe I can help.
I didn't want to bring it up at work, but my partner is hurting me at home.
Oh, no. I'm sorry to hear that. Would you like to talk about it?
Is there any point in talking about this at work?
You know, we have policies that can help keep you safe at work.
It would be such a relief to feel safe while I'm here.
Look, here's a list of resources for people dealing with domestic violence. I'm here to listen anytime, okay? You're not alone.
Maybe there is hope.
To assist our workers in dealing with domestic violence, you can have up to 10 unpaid days per year to deal with domestic violence. You will need to contact Murray. What you say is confidential. Gabriel Industries, we have a number of ways in which we will assist you with addressing domestic violence at the work site. It is all dependent upon the situation. Murray is the only one who has to know. Everything is kept confidential. We have now finished this training module. Please proceed on to the quiz.